Another video in the series. So this video is actually part of a series on the development of the rock, paper, and scissors app. Now, much of the discussion in the video is actually based on content from the Developing Swift Exploration course book that's provided by Apple for their iOS app development course, and the book is actually currently available for free on the App Store. You can see it in App Book. Now, the previous video, which is more like the part one of this series, was essentially focused on the description of the game itself, and by game I mean the rock, paper, and scissors game. So if you really want to understand how the game works in real life, you can refer to the part one of the video series. Now, this particular video is going to be focused on the general descriptions of the structure of the app that we're going to be developing. Now, it will inform how the code, the entire structure of the code, and the rest of the videos in the series would be laid out. Now, you can see the model view controller design pattern that's showing on the screen, or more popularly called the MVC design pattern. So that's what will be used to develop this course. And the purpose of the MVC is actually to separate the different parts of your app, giving clearly defined responsibilities to each of the parts, which will be the model. There's a part that would focus on the model, the other part will focus on the view, and the third part will focus on the controller. And the entire goal of creating this compartmentalization is to make your code very easy and readable, and also very easy to update. Now, what you need to know about MVC is that it's actually the default design pattern that's used by iOS software development, used within the iOS software development kit, which is the SDK. Cocoa Touch. You have the Cocoa, and you also have the Cocoa Touch, and Cocoa Touch is essentially focused on more of the iOS rather than Mac itself. Hopefully we get to talk a little more about Cocoa in a future video. So because it's like the native design pattern that's peculiar to the iOS SDK, most iOS developers actually follow this particular design pattern. Now, also remember to look out for my video that will be focusing on app architectures and design patterns, where I would actually be dissecting the entire concept, and where I will provide examples and demonstrate the application of these app architectures and design patterns. So I'm going to proceed to talk a little more about the model views and controllers. So what you would see here is the model view and controller design pattern is essentially broken up, which will be the various parts of your app is actually broken up in these three separate parts, right? So your app would have three separate parts so that you have clearly defined responsibilities for each of the parts within your code. So to think of the model controller and view design pattern, just think of a restaurant, right? When you get into the restaurant, there is some kind of back end where all of your purchases, the condiments and everything, right, come. So everything you buy from your restaurant ends up in the back end, which is where the kitchen is. So the equivalent for your app will be like all of your data. As you gather all of your data, everything ends up in the kitchen, right? And then all of the food is made in the kitchen, right? And that's your cook there, right? Collecting all of the purchases, all of the food condiments, and then doing the cooking. But then there is that interface which is more like the server, right? And the job of the server is to shuttle between the kitchen and the main restaurant, which is the front end where you have your clients and your customers. Now, there is some really hard demarcation between this and this guy. So customers don't just walk into the kitchen to come grab food, they have to talk to the controller. And the cook doesn't come over here to talk to clients and or your customers, right? All of that communication happens through the controller, and that's exactly how it is. So there are certain things that are restricted to this area, and then there are certain things that are restricted to this area, and then other things are restricted to this area. So, and that's literally how your app is set up. So as you begin to write your app, you might be jumping from one part of this to enter different codes depending on what it is that you're trying to achieve. As you can see, this is what everybody sees. That's the back end, right? So this is like your graphical user interface, and that part of it is what you call the view. Everybody sees when you look at your phone, everything you see right in front of there, the app, all the things you can interact with, the views you can interact with is what you have as the view. All of this data is data that has been gathered, your input data, every other thing, and everything is passed to the controller, and the controller makes sure the information is flowing back and forth between everybody. So um, for the upcoming videos, right, to develop this app, we're going to have one part of the video that is going to be entirely dedicated to creating the model for the app, and then we're also going to have a part that is dedicated to the view, and another part that is dedicated to the controller. So talking of the model, why would it be called model? You know, essentially what models do is that they actually hold all of the application data. So all of the data that you might need, will be held in the model. It also defines the logic that manipulates the data, how the data is manipulated. All of that is something that you see in the model. Um, and in case the data in the model changes, the model immediately notifies the controller. So it passes that information right to the controller, tells it about that change, and then eventually what's going to happen is the controller will now pass that information to the view. The model typically has no connection to the user interface or the view as I showed in that restaurant illustration. Now, talking of model, right, whenever you have an object, for example, a dog, you can actually create a digital representation of that dog. In other words, you can collect a lot of information about that dog. So when you're looking at the digitally collected information, it's very representative of the physical dog or the physical object. So what you are creating here is literally a model, right? It's not the real thing, but it's very representative of the real thing. So you're collecting all of this data. That's actually what we do in the model part of your app. So all of the things around, remember, in the earlier parts of this course, we discussed a whole lot of things around data types and how you collect data, how you arrange data, and all of that. Your strings, your structs, your classes, and your enum. You're actually going to see all of that play out as part of your model. Another example is also this. So you have a particular class and you have objects. So I can decide to represent this specific object, right? And this is my model of this object because it captures the car, and there are other properties that are not probably captured here that I can all capture. And at the end of the day, all the information I've captured here will be representative of this object. So that's the part about model. So model focuses on capturing all of that data, arranging the data, and then making that data available for the controller so that the controller can now serve that data to the view or to the front end, and then the users can interact with that data. And then you also have the view. So I've talked about the model, you know, now we're talking about the view. Again, the view is literally the front end of your user interface. So which is where the users actually see what's going on. They don't see what's going on underneath in the model. What they see is what's going on in the view. So it includes everything that the user is able to see and interact with. So everything you can see, for example, on your phone, that you can see and interact with, all of that will fall within the classification view. Now, view objects, there are different kinds of view objects, right? A lot of the parts that you use in creating your user interface, they are often reusable, and you can see that there is some kind of consistency between them, between different applications. So one of the things about the view is generally the view does not store, it's not responsible for storing data. All of that is managed within the model. But what it does sometimes is view can cache some of the data because it wants to have quick access to it, but generally it does not store data. All the view does is to represent the data or information that is coming from the model through the controller. So every time there is a change in the data, the view tries to represent that change. It draws it or it shows it. There are different ways it could display that data, but the idea is for it to be able to display that data so that the users can see that data. Now, that's going to be a different part of the app that we're also trying to develop. And then the third part is going to be the controller. The controller is literally like the intermediary between the model and the view. It manages the changes to the model and controls the flow of all of that data. Once the data comes, it passes all of that, determines where the data should go, and then forwards the instruction to the view so that the view, so once the controller receives the user input through uh, sometimes you enter some information in your phone, right? You put in some inputs. Guess what? The controller receives that input from the view, right? It then sends a request to the model asking it to process that input data. It might be asking it to add, to multiply, subtract, amplify, whatever it is. The model does all of what's being requested, and then it updates the view so that the view can make the necessary changes. So that's literally what the controller does. So that would be all we have for this particular part of the course. So my hope is that by now you would have actually been able to understand what the MVC design pattern is. So in the subsequent videos, we're going to start developing the app, and then we're going to start first of all with the model, the part that's the model, and then when we are done with that, we go to the view, which is where in the model we collect all of the data that we need, organize all of the data, then we go to the view where we create the user interface, and then we go to the controller where we now create a link between the model and the user interface, and they can talk to each other. And that's literally how you get your app. But organizing it in that way makes it easy for you to have a bird's eye view and to understand how things are organized, and to be able to write your code in an efficient way that makes it possible for other people to be able to read those codes and understand what is going on. So appreciate you and thank you for listening. I'll catch up with you again later. Take care.